about leadership in a time of crisis. And I feel really privileged tonight to be able to introduce our two speakers, outstanding wise women who are among my favorite people in the world. So I am happy to introduce you all tonight to Sister Teresa Kerala, SSND. She's currently the Director of Ministries for the Catholic Diocese of Dallas, where she oversees and collaborates with the diocesan ministers in the directors of the Office of Worship, Youth, Young Adult, and Campus Ministry, Catholic Social Ministry, Pastoral Cultural Ministry, Lay Formation, and Family Ministries to provide resources to parishes in all areas. She works closely with the Diocesan Council of Catholic Women as their spiritual advisor. As a retreat and formation speaker, Sister Teresa also works with various groups in the Diocese of Dallas in their special events. She comes to us with a background in years of pastoral experience working in parishes as a pastoral assistant and later as a pastoral administrator. Dr. Jewell is Associate Professor Emerita, having earned her Doctor of Ministry degree from Catholic University of America, and served as Associate Professor of Pastoral Theology and Director of Graduate and Undergraduate programs for us here at the Neuhoff School of Ministry at the University of Dallas. In 2017, she was named our Hager Scholar, which is one of the outstanding awards for faculty members. She's directed national leadership projects, including the Emerging Models of Pastoral Leadership, which was funded by the Lilly Endowment, and Open Wide the Doors to the Church, funded by Fatica. Her books include Navigating Pastoral Transitions, A Parish Leader's Guide, The Changing Face of the Church, Next Generations of Pastoral Leaders, and next Tuesday, her most recent book, co-edited with Ed Hannenberg, Transforming Ministry Formation, will be available from Paulist Press. Please join me in welcoming tonight Dr. Jewell and Sister Teresa Kerala.
Hello, everyone. We are delighted to be with you, and it's great seeing some familiar faces tonight. What we would like to do is open with a prayer. This is going to be a video. A little bit unusual. This is a video that was put together by two Catholic chaplains in New York while they were treating COVID patients, and they just felt a need to do something. One chaplain was Jewish, the other chaplain is Hindu, and they created this prayer based on Psalm 147. The word they use is harophe, and loosely translated, it means the one who heals.
Monet
I hope you enjoyed that. Crisis is something that we all share, of every race, of every age, of every makeup, social strata. It was quite an invitation that we received to talk about leadership in a time of crisis. So what we're going to do tonight is give you context. We're going to talk about crisis, grief, and trauma, and the role of the leader during those times. But we're also going to talk about a response to this. No matter what the crisis is, there are things that we can do that help us get through it. And so these include self-care as well as care for others in the community. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to invite you to take notes, and a couple of times during our time together, we're going to ask you to share some ideas and questions with us. So if you're ready to start, we want to talk about leadership first. In this webinar, we're looking at leadership in the broadest sense as the action of one who moves the community forward, right? Whether officially or unofficially. You may be a leader in your parish or in the community, maybe in your own business, and especially in your own home, right? So this webinar is every bit as much addressed to parents as it is to pastors. There we go. My quote's not showing up. All right. Everybody can become, not everybody can become Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa, or Martin Luther King Jr., right? But let us learn to lead and influence others as best we can. When all of us lead in a small way as a parent, educator, parish minister, healthcare provider, wherever we serve others, it will make a major difference in society. So what we're going to ask you to do, first of all, tonight is see yourself as a leader in your own space, in your own gathering, as well as officially or unofficially leader in larger groups. And we know that this past year, going on year and a half, has been a year of trauma. It has been one crisis after another, right? We've experienced disruption, upset, personal and communal loss. We've lost loved ones, friends, jobs, some of us. Some couldn't pay the rent. We have seen injustices exposed for what they are: racism, misogyny, corruption. Parishes had to lock their doors. Liturgies moved to live stream. Formation classes and outreach service nearly came to an end. What we're experiencing is collective trauma. The crisis is the event that happened. Trauma is our reaction to it, how we experience the crisis. And while some people have actually flourished during this past year, no one is exempt from what happened. So what we're talking about tonight is collective trauma, which can be defined as a traumatic psychological effect shared by a group of people of any size up to and including an entire society. So the crisis that happens might be something in your own family, the death of a loved one, someone going into the hospital, but it affects, that trauma affects the whole family. It might be something that's happened in your parish. Of course, our whole country and then the whole world has been going through the whole pandemic. And so all of us, whether we like to think about it or not, have been affected by this trauma. These are traumatic events witnessed by an entire society, and they can stir up collective sentiment, which feels very personal, right? I want to emphasize the word collective here. Nobody's exempt. All of us are feeling this, including every one of us on this call. And it feels personal. This is how my life has changed. What happened to me? Did I get sick? Did I quarantine for a year? How did it impact me? But it's impacting everybody. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. That is a quote. I won't take credit for it, but isn't that wonderful? We cannot walk through water without getting wet. We can't go through trauma without having experienced it. Trauma has 4 movements. Okay, the first is disorientation and shock, a death in the family, having to homeschool your children, or maybe quitting your job to do it, raises up lots of strong emotion, disbelief. You think people are lying and it's not really happening. But we've been through that. Then the next stage is normalizing, all right? I think we've been in the normalizing phase of this pandemic for over a year now. We've created a whole new language, right? Who is in your bubble? Children are learning in pods, masks. Do you have your mask? I have my mask. Oh, have you been vaccinated? I don't think I've been in a conversation for a couple of weeks now that didn't start with, have you been vaccinated? What did it feel like? Did you have a response to it? This is normalizing what we're going through. In these first 2 stages, you cannot handle big thoughts. Now, this is whether we're in a smaller crisis or a great big one. But once we start moving through phases, eventually we begin reconnecting. And I think this is what we are doing as a country, right? We're beginning to do this. We're beginning to get out of isolation. We're going back to restaurants. We're going back to church. We're, the blessing of all, going back to be with family. We're getting used to the change that we've had, and we're ready to move on. The final stage of trauma is meaning making. I think we as a country and as a people and individuals are far from seeing this happening. I don't think we're anywhere near being able to make meaning of what's happened in all of this, but we are moving through this process. Now, I'm just going to read these symptoms for you. There are immediate and long-term symptoms of this collective trauma. Numbness and disorientation. Some of these may sound kind of familiar. Hyperactivity. Do you know how many people learned to bake bread a year ago? Longing for normalcy. If we could just go back to Mass, right? Avoiding pain, staying in the head, denial. Oh, I'm gonna go on a vacation anyway. I'm not gonna wear a mask. It's not happening to me. Nightmares. I don't know about you, but my dreams have been pretty vivid. Fear, anxiety, agitation. Some days that's true, some days not. Anger, the need to blame. This one's been rampant, whether we're blaming Wuhan or some imagined other that's caused this for us. Hypervigilance. I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to go out without my mask. Distrust, aggressiveness, even abusive behavior, fixation on the future. These are all symptoms, and I think you probably will recognize them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I just ask you to take for a moment and see what you're sensing. Are any of these familiar to you? And I want to say to you as the leader, as leader, don't accept blame for what's happening. Whatever the crisis is, or this pandemic, or the locking of the church doors, or the having to sign up on the website to go back to church, whatever it is, don't let people blame you. This is what we're all going through. Now, I want to talk for a second about the nature of crisis itself. So crisis is the event, right? Okay. There is both an immediate event that we have to deal with, and then the long-term impact. And we're going to talk about both of those tonight. We all have to deal with the immediate issue up front. Our first response is to stabilize the situation, right? Make sure everyone is accounted for, get needed help, call 911 if you have to, whatever it is. And we do this with the help of experts, whether they're doctors or lawyers or pastors or whoever that might be, teachers, parents. But then there's the long-term impact. And I think this gets ignored a little bit, but it is there every bit as much. We must address the long-term impact with open hearts, right? We want to do it with compassion. And this is when we tackle the underlying causes of the crisis, and build the capacity to thrive in a new reality. So this long-term impact was all the scientists and the doctors that have created the vaccines and the treatments we've gone through in the pandemic. But this could also be your brother comes home in a wheelchair, and so you have to redo the ramps to get into the house and widen the doorways and lower the kitchen counters, whatever that might be in your situation. So we're going to look at both of those. The reality is that crisis is a turning point. It's an opportunity to reframe your life, a time to rethink how you do things. For example, now, it's good and it's bad. Crisis isn't all bad. The outcome might be. So, for instance, I'm amazed at how many husbands and fathers I've talked to feel like they found a whole new way of being with their families, a whole new life, when everything wasn't just work, 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 that they didn't realize what they were missing out on. Something's going to be different. There's a lot of families that are going to do things differently from now on, a lot more together with families. While CEOs want to bring people back into their offices, the latest survey says 10% of people don't want to go back to work. They like working virtually. All right, how do we reframe things? Leadership in a time of crisis then is orchestrating the inevitable conflict, chaos, and confusion so that the disturbance is productive rather than destructive. How can we deal with crisis so that it doesn't just wipe us out, but rather we can make something of it that makes a new life for ourselves? What we must do, absolutely, as leaders, is hold fast to the belief in resurrection. That is the gift that we have from our faith, the absolute and ultimate belief in resurrection. So basically what we're talking about is the Paschal Mystery, right? There's endings, something's ending. What do we have to let go of, leave behind? There's the between times, the Holy Saturday, and this cannot be rushed. I know we want everything back to normal and fixed and great, but the longer we accept the uncertainty of the between times, the better off we're going to be. It's going to be, and it's going to come out of this organically. And then there's the new normal. This is resurrection. This is when we regain footing, be creative, innovative. It's a time for trying new things. I mean, think about it. Over the past year, we've watched the blossoming of amazing creativity, and a lot of it online. Communities have begun to pray together in whole new ways. Disabled and homebound peoples feel included in the community in ways they haven't for a very long time. So what we're going to do now is offer you some tools and techniques for moving through crisis. And we're going to start with Sister Teresa talking about self-care.
Thank you, Marty. And I want to touch on just a quote for a minute that says, self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on this earth to offer others. And I believe I want to go back to what Marty had said earlier about leadership. I believe it's touching someone's life, calling forth their potential, and walking with them to make a difference. And I think all of us are called to do that in this world. We all know that in order to reach our potential and make a difference, that we have to, first of all, begin with ourselves. I learned that a long time ago. As the oldest of 7, I learned that somehow I got to take care of myself in order to be able to help my mom and dad with my brothers and sisters. And yes, you know, even as a parent, an educator, a parish minister, a healthcare professional, or wherever you find yourself in life, self-care is recognizing the need to be physically taking care of myself, emotionally taking care of myself, and spiritually taking care of myself in order to be able to respond to those needs of others. So I'd like to look at that physical self-care for just a minute. Well, the first part says maintain a healthy lifestyle, including appropriate time off. And I'm sure some of you are saying, oh, yes, sure. I'm a parent of 3 small children. I would carry a job. I have to make sure my kids are taken care of. I'm an educator. I've been doing all these things. I'm a parish minister and have all this on my list. And yet, you know, one of the things that we have to realize is that, yeah, you have all that stuff. You have everybody's stuff that you have to take care of, and especially yourself. But we do need to be gentle with ourselves. And I thought about this for a minute and wondered in my own life how I was impacted by that. You know, as I mentioned before, I'm the oldest of 7, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and Dad traveled during the week. My parents back then were busily, as most parents were, raising their children, taking care of the house, never, ever giving thought to time for themselves. What did that mean? But, you know, I can remember that my mom had a mint garden in the backyard, and she would spend time checking on it, pulling out the weeds, watering it, and then she'd bring in the ones that she wanted to make a salad. And my background is Lebanese, Middle Eastern. And there's a special salad called tabbouleh, and we used to have mint in it. And she would take care to prepare that. I'm sure at the time, Mom didn't think, oh, I'm taking time for myself and taking care of myself. All she knew is that she had some quiet time for herself, and she didn't hear her name being called. Mom, Mom, Mom. I'm sure some of you can know that in your own life today. I think giving ourselves permission to let go of all the items on our list, the deadlines, we find ourselves in just living. It's always hard for all of us in ministry, whether you're a parent, an educator, a parish minister, a healthcare worker, to let go of that and give yourself permission just to be. Dorothy Day says, nourishing yourself in a way that helps you blossom in the direction you want to go is obtainable, and you're worth the effort. That you are the one that is important at this particular time in your life. I'm also remembering a time that one of my nieces, who is a medical professional, she's an OBGYN doctor, completely, totally involved with her patients, oversees several medical clinics in her area. Her patients are her first concern. And especially during this COVID time, she set up COVID clinics. She spent hours and hours in her medical profession. But one of the things about my niece that I hold as a model for me is that she knew she needed to create her own space, a time where she could be refreshed, where she took the time out. And she became an avid gardener, planting all kinds of herbs, plants, and she even harvests bees, something I would never assume any of my family would ever do. But it gave her that time for herself. We need to give ourselves permission to be gentle with ourselves, to take one day at a time and know that you are worth it, to set those goals so that you can then be present to other people. I think besides our physical care, we also have to care for our emotional state in order to be the best possible minister and leader that we can. I'm reminded that if it were not for the many role models I had in my life, I would not be where I am today, not only as a professional, but as a human being. Personal sanctuaries, networks that help us to grow and become. I have always believed that God puts people and situations in our lives as signs of how we are to take care of ourselves so that we can be there for others. Safe people, sacred times with them that help us when we're unsure and times are dark. We've experienced those times of uncertainty and darkness, and we need safe place to be and sacred people to be with. You know, I'm reminded that when I was finishing my education as an educator, 22 years old, I was assigned to teach at a junior high in Houston. And I have to tell you that I knew everything. I was a college graduate. I was very confident. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I was sent to a house where I'm a school sister of Notre Dame. And I was sent to a religious community where there are about 30 sisters there. And they were all involved in education in some form in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston. And I remember walking into class that day, 30 junior high kids to teach religion all day long. And I thought, I can do this. You know, I know all this stuff. I know all the theology. I'm really good at this. After the first day, I remember going home and thinking, what did I do? I was kind of like St. Paul, who probably fell off his horse and bumped his head. And that's how I felt. But you know, if it hadn't been for the sisters I lived with, and the friends and the faith community I developed in the parish, they saved me from myself. They not only gave me the space to feel safe, but they were people I could trust as a confidant and an advocate for that time period, and really to even today, for the rest of my life. We have to find those people in our lives who we can be safe with, who can be those confidants and advocates. And we have to do that for ourselves first. In the words of Matthew that Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and you will learn from me." I believe that gives us hope that heals our wounds when we need healing and support us through all that we go through. I think besides the physical and emotional self-care, we also have to take care of ourselves spiritually. We have to be a person of prayer. We all know that that's easy to say, sometimes harder to do. But I think this past year has made us realize and kind of wonder, where's God in the midst of all this pain, all this suffering, all this loss, all the uncertainties that Marty spoke about earlier in the introduction. And I believe the only way we can get through this is to remember that we're not alone. God walks with us. I believe more than ever before, we're called to be persons of prayer, trusting and knowing that God heals it all. I've watched my sisters, some of who have become caretakers of their grandchildren, as well as cheerleaders for their children during this time, even more so. They've gone more deeply in their prayer life than ever before because they don't have the answers. And that's all they have to hold on to. I remember watching my mom have some quiet time in prayer, praying that whatever God had in store for her 7 children and for her and her husband was the right thing for them to do. I've watched my nieces and nephews hold on to dreams and hopes for themselves and their young families during a time when they lost a child, when they had a sudden illness, when they had financial setbacks, when they lost their jobs, when they had to move unexpectedly, and especially trying to juggle homeschooling, which they didn't really know how to do with their children, and the children didn't know how to do it, and the educators were struggling to do it, and they were carrying on full-time jobs and being virtual at the same time. And the mental stress of trying to keep it all together. I watched them reach out in so many different ways in prayer and knowing to trust God through the resources they had within their family, through their networks, and even within themselves. I believe for me, always as I reflect on this time period that we're in, the image of the second set of footprints on the sand, this constantly reminds me that I'm not walking the journey of life alone. And Philippians tells us, I can do all things through God who strengthens me. We need to know where we're coming from, and we need to be people of prayer. So I'm going to invite you to take a little bit of time for your own personal reflection, just to maybe jot down maybe a couple of things that maybe you heard and like to remember. And also I want to invite you to share maybe an idea or practice that has kind of helped you get through this pandemic. How have you self-cared for yourself in order to be there for others? So we're going to give you a couple of minutes just to think about that and to write it down.
If you would like to share some ideas with us, we believe in the wisdom of the community. We can share some of your ideas about self-care with us. We'll share them with the group, or maybe you have a question. Put it in the chat box or on your Facebook page. Okay, someone has said, taking appreciation to my introverted nature. Oh, us introverts. And being okay with saying no to the digital meetup.
How do I do this? Okay, how do I do this?
Do you see the chat box? It's at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, I saw that. And it says to Joseph. Is that what?
That's it. Type away.
Okay.
He's going to share it with us.
Okay.
Okay, again from Zoom. I need time alone to rejuvenate. I learned to really communicate with my husband about figuring out creative ways to do that when we were all in the house more than before. Walks or runs around the neighborhood, going out for coffee by myself. Great ideas. Oh, breathing techniques. I bet we could have talked about that. Thank you. Take time to slow our bodies and minds down with directed breathing. This one's from Facebook. Love the idea of stewardship of self in order to give myself to others. I am helped by having close friends and by spiritual disciplines. I ride my bike to have time with God and no radio. I like that. Mm-hmm. 10 seconds, a good book or movie. Maybe one or two more.
One of the comments on Facebook was FaceTime with family and friends has helped tremendously.
I got one. Let me see. Didn't go through.
What is it?
Stay away from negative people.
All right. There you go.
I read somewhere that stay away from negative people because they will find a problem for every solution.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual care, when there's crisis, may I recommend spiritual direction with a companion. Thank you. These have been marvelous. So we're going to move on now. But I think you've certainly got the idea. What we want to talk about now is how do you care for others and the community as we move forward in dealing with crises. This wonderful quote from 1 Thessalonians, therefore encourage and build up one another just as you are already doing. We have to be there for one another. We don't do this journey alone. Once you've taken care of yourself, it's time to think about what other people in your life and in the community as a whole, what they need. What do you want for your parish or your family, for your business, for your school? Now, again, remember, we're talking about community as anywhere from being a couple or a family to being a larger group or maybe even a parish. And we're going to suggest that there are both immediate and long-term responses. So I'm going to do the immediate responses, and Sister Teresa is going to share some long-term ideas. But whatever your crisis, the best way, and perhaps only way to move through it is to embrace it and not run away from it. Mm-hmm. If you don't embrace it, it'll wait around until you do, trust me. The impact of it will be there until you embrace it. So let's talk about some immediate responses you can use to deal with a crisis. First of all, and this sort of follows from what we've just done, take an assessment of your own response, emotions, and ability to be involved. Sometimes you have no choice. You have to be involved, but make a quick assessment. Are you in a good space? Are you emotionally able to be there for somebody in this moment? Like somebody said, it might be all right to say no in that moment, but just take that quick assessment. Can you handle this particular situation? And if you're struggling a little bit, what do you need to move forward in the moment? So take that quick assessment. But once you've done that, then the next thing you need to do, and this remembers in the moment, the immediate response is to discern and respond to immediate needs. And once you do that, then to figure this out, do you need to call an ambulance? Do you need to get children to a safe place? Do you need to go to a shelter? Can you meet with the staff? What is the immediate need that has to happen? Okay. And then the third thing is ensure what really matters will continue. It's going to take a moment to think this through, but there are needs that will not be as urgent as calling the ambulance, but stop and think about a minute. What really matters and what can wait? You don't need a 4-course dinner, but SpaghettiOs might work for an evening. Are you able to ensure Sunday liturgy? Is your food pantry still operating? People are still hungry. Are you going to be able to meet payroll? Are family meals being provided? So you need to ensure that what really matters will continue. We said before, but it will say this again, set short-term goals. All you need to do is get through this moment. That's all that's needed right now. So what could be a short-term goal? I'm going to go to the front door and be there when help comes. I'm going to get this person into a comfortable position. I'm going to sit down with my family and just be here for a moment while we take a deep breath. So no planning, no figuring out what's going to happen tomorrow. In the moment, just deal with what's in front of you. Now, once you've done that, really companion. Walk with others, be a companion. Walk with those who are affected by what has happened. Let people know they're not alone. If there's anything that I've learned, whether in my own life or in the research, is people need to know they're not alone. Call your next door neighbor if they live by themselves, or your grandmother. People just need to know someone cares. Not that someone has the answers. That's not what they need. They just, it's sort of that, does somebody know my name? When the pandemic first hit, I don't know if this has continued or not, but there were parishes all over where the staff and pastor literally sat down and phoned everybody, every registered parishioner, and said, how are you doing? Are you okay? Now, 9.5 times out of 10, the answer was, wow, you thought about me? Thanks, I'm fine. But I'll tell you, those conversations that went around the parking lot, the virtual parking lot, that somebody remembered me and I wasn't alone, made all the difference in the world. Listen, offer deep listening, be compassionate. And when I say deep listening, I mean just zip it up and listen. This is not a time to be offering advice. Ask people in your community, whether it's your family or your parish or your school, ask them about what has happened. Ask them how they are feeling about it. Feeling is not a word that we tend to be okay with, but it opens up all kinds of doorways. Wow, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about your mom being in the hospital? How do you feel about the fact that she's there alone? How do you feel about the fact that you can't go to the nursing home? Let the feelings out. People need to talk. They need to tell their story. And I've decided that that is how healing happens. We need to tell our stories. The mom of the new baby needs to talk about her unexpected C-section over and over and over again to move towards healing. But think about it. The pastor needs to talk about not being able to proceed as he always has. He can't get to his parishioners. Your aunt who has recovered from COVID needs to talk about what it was like being alone in the hospital. And this is a new one. People need to talk about getting vaccinated. Every conversation I've been involved in over the last month has sort of started here. Did you get vaccinated? What did it feel like? What was your response? How do you feel about it now? This is part of healing. Be compassionate. This is not a time to judge people. This is not a time to tell people they're right or wrong. Just open your heart to them and care for them. Sometimes people just need a caring friend. And as I mentioned before, don't assume the outcome of the crisis is going to be all bad. There may be better ways in the end. A family growing closer, a heart patient changing their diet, beginning to exercise. So don't assume you know what people are going to say. I remember the story of one father who his daughter came and wanted to talk to him, and he thought, oh my goodness, here it is. She's going to talk about, well, she said, can I talk about drugs? And he said, oh, this is it. I've been praying for this moment. I'm going to tell her all about drugs and everything. And he was smart enough to just say, what do you want to say? And what she said was, I'm afraid my friend is using drugs and I want to know if I can go and talk to her mother. So don't assume you know what people are going to say. Just listen. And then acknowledge the loss. Affirm the feelings. Wow, I know this is tough for you. I know you're feeling bad. I know you're feeling guilty because you weren't home that last night before mom got sick. I can understand why you're feeling the way you do. Remember, unhealed trauma inhibits growth, whether in a family or a parish. So acknowledge the loss. Here's an interesting one, and Sister Teresa talked about this when we were planning this, and I thought it was fascinating. Resist going back to the way things were. Folks, there's no going back. People want to. I get it. If we just unlock the doors to the church and go back, everything will be just fine. But that's not the way it works. Know that one of the responses to unexpected and unwanted change is to try to go back to the way things were and as fast as possible. It's a way of regaining control, but resist that if possible. There's no going back. Acknowledge the desire for safety and security that going back represents. I know it felt safe then. I know we felt secure then. But right now, this is the time to move forward, holding on to what is essential and allowing the new to happen. Let it take time. Again, people want to regain control. We all do. It's okay to live in the uncertainty of not knowing as long as possible. The new will gradually appear. Life will go on. And communicate. Clear up rumors. Give people a sense of control. You know, rumors, whether virtual or real parking lot conversations, if people don't have answers, they fill in. And communicating includes, by the way, talking to our children. Tell them that they can do this, that they're the first generation ever to virtually homeschool, and you are there for them. I think children are smarter and more observant than you think they are. I know one family, this is a true story. The mother was being treated for thyroid cancer. She needed an operation. The outcome was good and everything worked out fine. But while they were going through the process, the parents were afraid that their 9 and 12-year-olds would get too scared if they heard the word cancer. So they didn't tell them. They still told mom was going to have surgery. Well, after about a week, the kids went to their grandmother and they asked if mom was dying because they aren't telling them what is happening. Did she have cancer? Responses can be appropriate, age appropriate, but I think as much as you can share with people, that's the best that we can do. And finally, deal with emotional polarization. And what do I mean by that? You're going to have a group of people who want to go back to the way everything was. You have a group of people who want everything new right now. And then you're going to have a group of people who are absolutely paralyzed. And so how do we bring these people together? All of this is about the grief process. Recognize it for what it is. It is a way to heal. And I'm going to take just a moment to talk about personal grief. You know the stages, you've probably seen them. If you've lost someone, if you've lost something, you're probably grieving. But whole communities can grieve as well. Parishes have been grieving the loss of Eucharist and the loss of their communities, the 5 p.m. community or the 10 o'clock on Sunday morning community. Grief starts with denial and numbness and shock, you know that. And then it goes to anger. Anything from grumbling to rage. Imagined revenge, right? Blaming can be misdirected. Don't you accept the blame, right? And then bargaining. Bargaining is another attempt to regain control. If this happens, then all will be well. If I lose weight, get a new job. If I learn to play the piano, if I go into the priesthood, everything will be all right again. I will or I won't get married. I will or I won't go back to work. And sadness, depression, anxiety, you know what those are, sadness. And by the way, do notice the difference between sadness and depression. Depression includes hopelessness, shame, loss of motivation, and needs professional support. Sadness is something different and we all experience it. Okay, that's the immediate. Now, Sister Teresa is going to talk about the long-term responses.
As Marty mentioned before, looking at sort of where we are in our journey and in our call to leadership, looking at what we do immediately, and then what's the long term? What's going to be our new awarenesses that we have, the new beginnings that we have? We can't continue to stay where we were before. It's really letting go of the past. It always feels comfortable and secure. We always love what happened before. All of us can remember growing up that we hear from our parents, well, when I was young, it happened this way. And so therefore, we can't continue to do that. We need to ask, where are we going from here? And, you know, we can take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, and spiritually, but then we need to also realize that we need to begin our support and guide for others on the journey. I believe we're called to take others' hand and journey with them. And as Marty mentioned, to some of the losses and changes that we've had in life, we can't do this by ourselves. We really have to be with one another. I watched and listened as my nieces and nephews, as I mentioned before, balance their work, both virtually and their children's schooling virtually. I saw some of those personal experiences of grief, fear, despair. How are we going to get through this? What's going to happen? And then finally realizing and reframing the situation they were going through and saying, wait a minute, we've got another solution to this. We've got grandparents who we can ask to Zoom with our child for an hour while I get some of my work done on my call to my office. We've got aunts that'll come pick them up and take care of them for the day if I'm loaded with presentations. And we've got neighbors who help us through, who we can talk with as a support group through social media. And so they learned how to take what they had, they reframed the crisis, and were so masters of creativity and found ways that, you know, even today, they've enjoyed doing it. So they were thinking outside of the box as far as how do we go and where do we go from here? And that's being aware. And then I think taking action. And what does it mean to be actively responding to what we're dealing with? And I think Marty touched on it a bit about communication. Leadership, I believe, has to be the ability to be clear and articulate what's taking place. You as the leader, whether it be mom or dad, the parent in the family, the educator in the school, the parish minister, the pastor, the staff, the medical personnel, all of us are called to tell people and give them information. It invites us to assure people that all will be well, that the future is dark, may seem dark, but that together we can bring about light, and recognizing that saying that people say, it always takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child, takes a village to educate, it takes a village to move to the next steps of hope, trust, and new beginnings. I read somewhere Father Donald Sr., a Passionist, in his book, The Gift of Administration, talks about all of us having a mission, a particular call in our life. And I believe leaders, all of us that we're called to, need to remind others about their mission and call in life. I think a wonderful example of recognizing all that we have is in Luke's gospel, when Jesus is finished his preaching, and Luke describes the experience of Jesus in going onto Peter's boat. And they'd been fishing all day long and nothing was happening. And Jesus comes on the boat and he says, Peter, go that way. And Peter, trusting and believing that this person that he saw as his leader and his teacher was telling him the right thing, did exactly what he asked him to do. And he was able then to see a new light. He was able to pull in a lot of fish to help provide for his family and the community. He wasn't afraid. And I think as leaders in our own lives, we need to be that for the community. We need to keep the mission and call in front of us, listening to the wisdom of the community, our families, our schools, our parish, or wherever we find ourselves. You know, I am around my nieces and younger nieces and nephews a lot, and I'm grateful for that. God has been good to me in terms of that. And I listen to their wisdom. If you listen to young children, their wisdom gives you a whole lot of information about what life is like or should be. And there's wisdom within each of our communities, wherever we are. I saw parish ministers struggling during this pandemic, trying to figure out how are we going to respond to the needs of our faith communities and our faith formation. I heard teachers saying, what are we going to do if we can't have them in person? And you know what they did? They began to have drive-bys. They had faith formation boxes. They had reading times for their kids. One kindergarten teacher drove in the neighborhood and stopped at each one of the houses and read to her kindergarten children. They held virtual prayers. And as Marty mentioned, a lot of our parishes and school and teachers, educators reached out and regularly called people left messages on their doors and in their yards, and health professionals who found ways to care for the patients who were dying and lonely because their families couldn't, who held them when they could, who helped them FaceTime with their families, who brought some hope to them in their last hours of life. They all recognized that it would take a village to bring about the good news, to make sure everyone was cared for and was reached. They continued to care for those in their life. And then I think too, part of our long-term response is spiritual. I think we're called to be signs of hope and new life for others, as well as for ourselves, as we move into the future. We recognize, as Marty had mentioned before, we can stay in pain and darkness. We can let ourselves be completely paralyzed with all that happens around us. Oh, I can't do anything. Everything's all bad. You know, nothing's going to happen. Or we can believe that we really are living in the resurrection and be transformed by a spirit that guides and directs us, both in our families, in our educational systems, in our healthcare systems, and in our parishes. The Spirit is alive in us and in the world that we live in, and it's present in every single moment of our lives. I think that freshness, see this as an opportunity for a fresh start, is to be open, to listen, to hear the movements of the Spirit in prayer. Be creative. Think outside the box. Reevaluate, rethink what's important in our lives. We've lost so much time with family, time to experience our sacraments. We've lost some of that in the past, but it's not gone. We just have to think differently with it and be with people differently and celebrate the sacraments differently with a new heart and a freer spirit. From where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. God was there during, he's now, and is always there in the future.
Some of these seem easy, some of them seem maybe simplistic, but these are the ways we move through crisis at every level, whether it's personal or communal. They work at every level. So we invite you to write down 1, maybe 2 things that you'd like to remember. And then we're going to take questions in the chat box or the Facebook page, or if you have insights that you want to share, we would be glad to read those out as well. So we'll give you just a minute to write things down. We welcome your questions. So if you could start writing those down. The first one, Teresa, I might take a pass at it. Maybe you would too. The question is, could you brainstorm out loud some of what a community would look like, either framework, even imagination in the new, if we shouldn't go back to the old? My quick answer would be, no, I can't do that. But probably the better answer would be, first of all, you ensure what is essential. So you're going to provide, if it's in your parish, you're going to provide liturgy, you're going to provide sacramental prep, you're going to provide service, those things. But it's how you do them and how you approach them that might be different. And my suggestion to you is to do two things. First of all, hopefully your community has a vision statement for your parish. The mission statement, of course, is the mission of the church, but a vision for your parish. And then gather people together and ask, what do you want? What has happened for you over this past year? Oh, you want us to keep live streaming. What would that look like? Someone said to me, well, Mass would not be different. But I beg to differ, because the ritual is the same, but what are the homilies changed? Do the homilies address trauma and grief and persistence? How do we choose the music? How do we choose the petitions? All of that. Sister Teresa, do you have a response to that?
Well, the first thing for me is to listen to the wisdom of the community. I think the community as a whole, whether it be your family, the school system, whatever community you're a part of, listen to what their experience has been this year, for number one. Because I think, for a good example is some of the streaming masses that we've had on the diocesan level and as well as in the parish level, it has touched people at their core, people that haven't been able to celebrate the sacraments for years, not just now, but are homebound, have special needs, they can't get, this has touched their heart. So if that's what they're saying to us, then that's what I mean, as far as maybe we need to keep doing that. Maybe we need to start addressing what those needs are, people that are homebound with the sacraments. I think listening to the wisdom of the community, and I think paying attention to how we have thrived either as a family in being more connected with each other, having time with each other that maybe we didn't have before. I think recognizing what the experiences are is what I think will move us into a new way of being a community, a family, a school system, that we weren't that way before. I think the pandemic has been a blessing from God, reminding us about what's important and what our priorities are. And it's sadness, but it's also a little bit of joy, I think. That's just what I would offer as a suggestion.
Okay. One of our Zoomers said, I want to remember and plan for, don't expect things to remain the same. Tradition with a small t, doing what we always did is probably not life-giving, not now. Sister Teresa, why don't you take this one? In leadership, as a sensitive person, I have problems with the tyranny of the urgent. Each person has a cause, a pet project. How can I assure them that they're heard without promising or overextending?
You know, my experience is that sometimes just giving people a time to just listening to them, giving them the space to be able to say what it is they are searching for, and then inviting them to maybe, I don't know, articulate how that would take place and how it would make a difference and impact the community. One of the things I have learned in pastoral ministry is that people always come with a story. There's always something in their life they need to talk about. And sometimes if you're the person that they're doing this with, it's really God sort of speaking to them in a certain way and bringing healing into their lives. I'm always cautious about telling people if they want to come and do a certain project when they were in the parish or in the diocese, I often hesitate to say, oh, yes, we can always do that. And yes, well, yes, I'll be more than happy to do that. I've learned from models that I've had that you can't always do. They don't really necessarily want that. They just need somebody to listen to them and to support what their idea is in some creative way.
And I would add to that, you don't have to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
There are unofficial leaders in the parish as well. There was a lovely story, a small rural parish discovered that it wasn't going to be able to make a $10,000 payment this month. And they were at their parish council meeting trying to figure out what to do. Now, one member of the parish council was an older woman. She always dressed in black. She never said anything. So people kind of had not paid a lot of attention to her. And she just stopped the meeting and she said, tell me exactly how much money you need. And they said, we need $10,000. And she said, excuse me, and left the room. I didn't know what that was about. They kept on talking. A half an hour later, she came back and said, you will have your $10,000 tomorrow by noon. I said, what did you do? And she said, well, I called my 10 best friends and told them they each had to give $1,000. So, lots of people can carry the burden along with us.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any more questions?
I don't have a question. I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. I think I did a lot of reflections during this pandemic. I spent a lot of time, got deeper into scripture. I did, and I'm still practicing Lector Divinum. But I think that one of the things that came out, and I think you touched on it, Dr. Joe, by the way, I'm so happy to see you, is that the divine mystery of the resurrection is that the resurrection is in us. Through the Holy Spirit, he lives us, and the Holy Spirit gives us so many gifts that are for the betterment of the community, and they're not meant to hold. And when we meet with other people, I know that it's happened to me. I recognize, and I'm holding a particular group together, that I recognize that there was a bunch of women, and we appear strong, and we are strong, and we're mothers, and we're leaders and everything. And everybody looks at us that way, but there are cracks in the foundation. And so I've organized this group, then we talk and we listen, and we're doing this. Where are you? And then we'll do some Lectio Divino, and we talk about, wow, what did you get out of this? And it's, the Spirit moves us together and brings us together. And I'm very convinced that it is just reaching out to him, and he's there. The Holy Spirit is there. We just kind of sometimes need to stir it up a little. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I think you've set me up perfectly for our final words to you. So, and finally, there's no room for complacency. Complacency tells us there is no point in trying to change things, that we can do nothing. It'll always be the same. We just need to survive. This is from Pope Francis. He continues, during this time of uncertainty and the unknown, we need to rethink our usual ways of doing things with open eyes and hearts that know that God is in the midst of it all. Thank you, Pope Francis. I think many of us, if not all of us, know the truth of that statement. So we invite you to remember that healing is God's work through Christ in the presence of the faith community. We're not doing the healing. We're just God's instruments. God does the healing work through our Lord. And that we don't walk alone, that even if they're not in the room with us or on a virtual meeting with us, we are being held all the time in a faith community. This is the Paschal Mystery, this pattern of life, death, and resurrection. This is the pattern of our lives. And if we can see all of this that way, too often I believe we get stuck in the pain of the cross. That's that paralyzed that we were just talking about. But crisis is not the end of the story. It is not. We are kingdom people. In the end, resurrection prevails over crucifixion. We don't know what it's going to look like. Resurrection is not resuscitation. Things will be different in some way, but this we must hold, that we are kingdom people and resurrection prevails. So thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Sister Teresa, would you like to say some final words?
Just to thank each of you for being present with us, for those of you that offered comments and suggestions and ways that you yourself have seen yourself through all that you've been through. And to continue to hope that even though our title was Leadership in a Time of Crisis, I think Marty said it in the beginning, and we've tried to kind of say that throughout, that crisis also brings about new life, that there are new beginnings and new hope for us. And that's what we have to focus on, I think, as we move forward. Knowing it's not always going to be the same, but that's okay. Change helps us see that. So thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure for me personally, especially to work with Dr. Jewel and to have this experience. And so know that we'll be holding all of y'all in our prayers too, as we move through all this together.
So Oscar, if you're teed up there, we would like to close again with the same prayer that we opened with, Haro Fe. God heals the brokenhearted.
I just wanted to thank our presenters tonight, Marty Jewell and Sister Teresa Kerala. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and your insight, and for reminding us just about the process that takes place in dealing with times of crisis and responding to them, and helping to walk and accompany others in the midst of that process as well. Thank you also for your leadership in this Faith Connect series and your work here in the diocese. We're really excited about all of that. And we have one more Faith Connect series in English that's coming up. And I don't have the date here in front of me, but we'll be dealing with the topic of synodality. Synodality is a theme that has been really key to Pope Francis's pontificate, and looking at the ways that we talk to each other across differences. The date will be June 28th, and we are really excited. So thank you for those of you that joined us on Zoom, and for those of you that joined us on Facebook Live as well. Remember, you'll be able to see a recording of this soon on our YouTube channel. Thanks again. Here we are.
Haro Felix Fure Le Umchabesh Leat Vota Monet Mispar La Kochavim Lechulam Shemot Yikra. May the light of the stars heal the